How are you, Naz?
I'm all right, thank you, Charlie.
Are you feeling a wee bit nervous?
A little bit, yeah.
Well, thanks for having us in your home.
Thanks
It's
for
been an
coming.
absolute pleasure meeting you and your partner.
Yeah.
Welcome to Unfiltered Lives, the other side, Naz. You've been on my radar for some time, so it's a privilege to get you on the chair, and I can finally speak to you about your journey.
It's a privilege to be asked. Thank you for asking me.
Yeah. Just a quick side note: you were at my second meeting.
I was, yes.
And I've been intrigued by you ever since I've met you, because you're definitely one of a kind in the fellowship, aren't you?
I am.
Uh,
I very much am.
I remember sitting in the meeting, and I think I was probably just over 24 hours. I'm in sober man or something, and you had different colour of hair, and you look flamboyant, and you look completely different. And that's what I loved about you. I love people who are that little bit different from a society. They're just that wee bit different. They've got their own style, their own nature. And I absolutely love that. So I just wanted to say that, man, first of all.
Thank you.
And thank you for making my second meeting very, very pleasant. And you've been really warm. And the world needs more Nazis.
I try to be so welcoming to everyone, because I remember when I came in to the meetings, if I hadn't been welcomed with the welcoming that I had, I probably wouldn't have come back. So I always try and be warm and welcoming so that people will come back.
Yeah, and you certainly are that. So I just wanted to say, man, thank you, man, for that. Naz, you're non-binary?
I am, yes.
And what do you like to be called?
I'm called Naz. It wasn't the name I was assigned at birth, but it's my name now, and it has been my name legally for the past 8.5 years. And I also use neutral and male pronouns. So like he and they.
Right.
So.
Oh, fantastic. So could you take us on a little bit of your journey? Where did this all start? Tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, and
so I'm Naz, and I'm an alcoholic. And I started my gender journey, I suppose, when I was about 5 years old. We were staying with a family, and they had a couple of girls and a boy. And there was something that happened, and I ended up sharing a bath with the lad. And I wondered why we looked so different, because I was more like him than I was like my sister and the girls that we were staying with. And I just couldn't understand it. But then I got told about very basic biology, and kind of put it to one side for a few years. But I was always definitely like a tomboy growing up. Was always a bit more masculine than my friends. And yeah, I loved playing with the lads. I had a good mix of friends. And then when I was 15, I saw a documentary on a trans man, and I was really intrigued by him, and I resonated with a lot of what he was saying about how he was feeling, how he felt in his body, and I was like, maybe that could be for me, but it's not quite for me. I don't know, because I still like certain girly things and blah 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 blah, and it was a very confusing time in my life, and especially with all the hormones and stuff. So again, I put it to one side. Was still quite tomboyish, but I was also having more girly days as well. And
so what age would you say that you started to kind of experience that a masculine man side that you
5.
5, is that you?
Yeah,
So as
like
early as 5,
that's my
as
earliest
early as
memory
5,
of
you're already
thinking that.
experiencing that
Yeah,
masculine side.
yeah, yeah, definitely. So yeah, from 5 was definitely the time I started questioning not being female. But I could never quite get to the point of saying I'm definitely male.
Yeah.
Because I was definitely not male, but I was definitely not female either. So I suppose my compromise was when I was 14, I'd come out as bisexual. So that gave me a bit more. I felt a bit more freedom to be a bit more quirky, because for me, I've always seen what I call queer people. I know not everyone says queer, but I do. I've reclaimed that. I always say that queer people are a bit more quirky, a bit more different. And so, yeah, I'd come out with 14. And then not long after that, I had a big upheaval in my life, and my parents split up. And me being using my isms, I self me, I thought that my parents splitting up was my fault. Because my parents had managed to keep everything like to themselves about their own problems. And I thought it was all my fault. I'd come out, it's all my fault. My parents hate me. They can't choose which, one supports me, one doesn't. I didn't know. I had no idea. But that's what I thought. That's what I felt. And then, so then I saw that thing when I was 15 as well, which
the documentary,
which confused my mind even more. And my mind was racing. And by this point, I'd already had my first drunk as well, which was on the Millennium.
Can I just ask you how school was? Because that must have been a massive part in your life, like school, being as quirky as what you are.
Well, school was already difficult because I haven't mentioned, because it hadn't been relevant to this point. I moved about a lot as a child, so I think I worked it out. I've been to 14 places of education.
Oh, wow.
In my life, including nurseries, primary schools, comprehensive schools, colleges, universities, like you name it. I've been to loads. So I moved about a lot as a child because of my dad's job. And so I was good at school, but it was always difficult because I was always the new kid. I was always the short kid. I was always the quirky kid. I was always, like, because of my dad's job, I was always that kid. And it was just so, I enjoyed the academia, but I hated the socialising. So I've learned about loads of different things in school, and some things in school I've learned like 2-3 times because I've been taught in 2 or 3 different schools I've been to. But yeah, it was when I was about 14, I fell in with the queer kids. Like, there was a small group of us. I think there was about 5, and we were all part of the LGBT spectrum. And we just all used to hang around together, and it was really sweet. It was really lovely. But at the same time, I feel like because we were so unique, that it was a bit of a difficulty for us to connect with the rest of the school. But we had really good, solid friendships, and I still have friendships with some of them today. Like 20 odd years later. Which is lovely, absolutely lovely. But yeah, so around that time, I had all this stuff going on in my head. My parents had split up. We'd moved again. And then I was also like spending time between my dad and my mum. I lived with my mum, but we visited my dad. And then around this time, my dad got into a new relationship. And me and my stepmom, we didn't get on. She was very her. I was very me. And we clashed. We absolutely clashed on everything. And I struggled a lot with that. I struggled a lot with her. I struggled a lot with trying to find myself. Like I said, I was battling with my gender again, battling with my sexuality.
Has that been a big battle in your early days from 15 to your 20s? Was that a battle that you were still battling? Was that...
It was... I knew that something was different. I knew that something was still not quite right. And this has been a battle I've had throughout my whole life. I've always had a sense of different. I've always had a case of the uniqueness, as I've heard a friend put it before.
What does that feel like, that not knowing, or that hardship that you have in your mind, trying to find that identity? Because someone who is male, heterosexual, that's, in me, that just comes with being human. But I mean, for someone who is battling that must be extremely difficult.
It has been, and it still can be. It has been a big case of trial and error.
Has it?
Like, always trying to find the right person, always trying to find the right fit, trying to find a place where I felt I could be me. But then not knowing who me was always a struggle. And I always tried, I tried to fit in. I had so many masks. I had so many masks. I had a mask for every person. Like, it wasn't even groups of people. I had a mask for every single person. There were some people that had very similar masks, so that was okay. I could deal with them. And then I'd have a different group of friends, and they all had a different similar mask. But it was always finding difference. Like, I could never find same. I never found anyone like me until a lot later on in my life, because I didn't know who I was. I always felt like there must be somewhere I belong, but I've just not found it yet. And it was a big struggle for many years. I've had male relationships. I've had female relationships. I've had trans relationships of all kinds. I've got a trans male ex. I've got a trans female ex, who we'll get back to later. I've got a non-binary spouse now, who we'll also circle around to later. But yeah, like, and all my exes have been different. I can't, because I was at different points in my life. Like, I think everyone was so different because I was trying to be someone different. I was trying to be that person for that person. I was trying to be that person for that person. I was always trying to be someone else because I didn't know who me was.
Naz, so if you could tell me about your first drink then. What was your first drink and what was that like?
My first drink was the millennium.
2000.
The year 2000, Y2K. Yes. I was staying at a friend's house, so my family wasn't there. And I was staying with a friend, and we were on the ye old English cider, which I have never touched since. we had 3 bottles between 3 of us. And if my memory recollects, I had 2 of those to myself. I was a bit of a nuisance on the street.
How old were you?
I was 14.
14.
I was 14. I was turning 15 that year. And yeah. But from that point, I didn't actually have another drink until I was 16.
Mm-hmm.
And 16 was when it really kicked off. 16 was when my alcoholism kicked in. And I had all the excuses.
Yeah.
And I know now that they were excuses, but at the time they were valid reasons. Mm-hmm. So my parents had split up. I didn't like my stepmom. We didn't get on. I'd just left school, and because of the move with my dad, I'd lost a lot of my coursework, so I had to resit my GCSEs at the age of 16, which was like the end of the world.
Especially at that age.
Yeah. And then not long after that, my granddad died. And that was the big one for me, because me and my granddad growing up, like, I loved him to bits. Like, he was like one of my best friends, and his loss was massive to me. And as soon as I had that, I hit that fuck it button.
Yeah.
I absolutely hit it. But at this point, I started putting rules in place, because I wasn't going to be an alcoholic.
Uh-huh.
This was my ruling. I wasn't going to be an alcoholic, so I wouldn't drink every day.
Uh-huh.
I didn't drink every day. I took a day off a week. I took 1 day off a week, which is...
Same day every week?
Pretty much Sunday.
Sunday?
Yeah. Because I had college on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and I was out with my friends on Saturday. So, by rights, Sunday was the only day that I should be at home with my family. So I tried that for the most part. I mean, sometimes it didn't work like that, so I'd choose a different day, usually a Monday or Tuesday. But yeah, I was, because everything was so topsy-turvy in my head, like, I just wanted everything to just shut up.
Yeah.
And I found that alcohol did that.
Yes.
I absolutely found that alcohol did that. So I drank.
Mm-hmm.
And not only did I drink, I was a smoker at this point as well. So I drank and I smoked, and I smoked and I drank. And then they put one of those games machines in the pub that I used to go to. So I used to go onto that. So adding gambling as well. So smoking, gambling, drinking. Yep, I was off and I was away. I was finding anything I could. And I was in and out of relationships, in and out of, well, I wasn't even in and out of relationships. I was in and out of people's beds. I was quite promiscuous when I was younger. What I would do as a general rule at that time was I would date men and I would sleep with women because of where I lived, because I lived in Durham at the time, and it was very much small town mining community headspace still. And it wasn't until I moved away at 23 that they had their first gay night. Now they have gay prides and everything, but they hadn't even had a gay night before now, before I moved away at 23. And it was around this time, when I was about 22, I came out as a lesbian. And I thought that that might fix my drinking. Mm-hmm. I might be able to drink like a normal person if I just start to fix myself.
Mm-hmm. I get that.
So I thought that would fix it, because I'd done everything. I must have. I was just a butch tomboy lesbian. that had girly days. Like, that's what I was. Like, it must be. I must have been able to fix myself, not realising that the gay scene is 90% alcohol based and 10% everything else. So I went from being a drunk that hid the feelings to a drunk where it was socially acceptable because I'm gay. Like,
so now you don't have to hide
I don't have to hide it. So I can drink like a normal person, like any other normal alcoholic person that is like in their early 20s. Like, every gay person seems to be an alcoholic, not realizing that they all had jobs, and they all went and did different things, and they took nights off, and I was out with a different group of people pretty much every night. In fact, at this point, I think it was every night. But at this point, I didn't start drinking before, I think it was like 5, 6 o'clock in the evening. So I still wasn't an alcoholic.
Yeah.
Because I could spend the day sober, not registering that day that I was spending sober, I was spending asleep.
Yeah. You're just having one day off and then you're not drinking during the day. But
yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, at that point, I don't think I was even having a day off. And it was all hunky-dory, and I thought that everything was perfect, everything was brilliant. My life was revolving around me, like it should do. And my thinking was chaotic again. My depression and anxiety had started skyrocketing. But it's all right because it was socially acceptable because I was gay. And then I met this lovely girl, and she was so pretty, and I had this really big crush. And I went to karaoke one night at one of the gay bars, and I saw her. And then I told my friend the next day when we were out, because we spent the day together. And she was like, "I'm sure I recognise that girl at the bar." And I was like, "That's the girl I was on about."
Yeah.
So she ended up saying, "Well, why don't you go and ask her name and everything?" And I was like, but I did. And it turned out that she was a transgender woman, and she had been a school friend of my friend before she transitioned, which was why she couldn't quite place her. And we ended up being together for about 4.5 years.
Wow.
And out of that 4.5 year relationship, we had a beautiful baby girl, naturally. And I lost a lot of friends, well, so-called friends, during that time, because I was no longer a true lesbian, because we'd naturally made a baby together, and because my girlfriend had a dick, which I saw no problem with, because I've always seen her as a woman, and I still do, because she is one. But they didn't, and they ousted me from the gay community, because how can you be gay if your girlfriend's got a dick? And I'm just like, oh, shut up. But then she started going to a trans and non-binary group, and I heard this non-binary, and my brain started ticking over again, remembering how I'd felt when I was 15, when I'd seen that documentary, how I'd felt when I was 5, and how I'd always thought when I was growing up.
Started to make sense.
That all of these masculine thoughts that I'd had, they started to tie together. And it was like a light bulb came on.
How old were you then when the light bulb came on? What age?
I was 29.
Oh, 29. So you've lived nearly a whole life then before the light bulb moment, isn't it?
Yeah. But it was like everything that I'd felt, everything I'd thought, everything I'd sensed about myself suddenly started making a lot more sense. And I was still struggling a bit at the time, and I was still learning, and I was doing loads of research. But at that time, my ex really struggled with it because she'd always known this bubbly, outgoing girl. And then I wasn't a girl, and it was just too much for her, and we ended up parting ways. And I have no hard feelings about that. Like, there was a lot of stuff that was going on behind the scenes as well, and we drifted apart. We still maintain a relationship of sorts because we share a daughter, and it's a lot better than it has been. It's took a few years, but we're finally at a decent place. And then from that point, I started thriving a bit more. I got in contact with local services, who was also a good friend of mine. And he'd known me when I used to do drag, because I used to be a drag king in my drinking days. And he always knew that I'd always seemed a lot more comfortable when I was in the drag as opposed to when I was out of the drag, but it wasn't his place to say until I made that realisation myself. And he supported me. He got me to a different local charity that had a group in the area, and I kind of came out there. And they've never known me as anything but Naz either. And
that must have been lovely.
It was.
That must have been a lovely moment.
Yeah.
That identification for yourself finally found in Naz.
Yeah. I mean, I've always had Naz. Naz was a nickname that I got when I was a young child. Because there was a group of friends and we all shortened our names down. And Naz had just always felt right, and it had always been a nickname from 6 years old. Like, so it had always been there. But yeah, it was just to drop my old name and just be Naz. That was exhilarating. It was like I felt when I finally discovered I was alcoholic as well.
Excellent. So you just started to find your identity, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely. So me and my ex split up. We ended up having a breakup and everything, and then I got put onto a lesbian like Facebook group, and I was out drinking quite a bit again at this point, because I'd gone from having one day that I could drink massively to 3 days I could now drink massively because I was having shared custody. And I commented on one of those silly little posts, would you kiss the person who commented above you? And I commented that I would kiss the person above me, and then the next person that commented was my now spouse. So we met on a Facebook group. We got chatting on that group, and then we moved it to private messaging, and then we video called each other, and then finally they came up to visit, and it was amazing. But I'd already had a little bit to drink by the time they came up, because I was still very much in my drinking. But I do believe that meeting my spouse became the beginning of the end for me.
When was your last drink?
My last drink, Boxing Day 2017.
2017?
Yes.
Wow.
But I've still got a little bit to get there. So what I also did with my spouse is I told them straight off, I'm not a girl. I'm in a lesbian group, but I'm not a girl. I'm non-binary. And I made it clear from the get-go, because I didn't want the same thing that I just had with my ex. I didn't want to start a relationship with someone and not have them know me. Because I was very much at the time at a point where I was like, I need you to know who I am. And I'm only just learning who I am.
How important that was to you.
But I want you to know that I have a lot of things that I don't know yet, about what's going to happen in the future. So I laid it all kind of bare before they came for the first night up, which turned into a weekend up, which turned into the beginning of an 8.5-year relationship so far. But I knew when I met my partner, when I met them the first time, something had to change. I'd already changed my gender and I was already out with that, and that was fine. But I knew I needed to change something else. By this point, when I forgot to say earlier, when I found out I was pregnant with my daughter, I'd stopped smoking. So smoking was no longer part of it. I'd cut down loads on the gambling, so that was no longer an issue. But the drinking was still an issue. So I started cutting down. I cut down how much I drank. I cut down how regularly I drank, but I was still drinking more than a temperate drinker would. I still had it hidden around the house. I still had lots of issues. But when they moved in the January after we'd met in the November, the day before they moved in, I went round and I found all my stash and I finished all my stash. I wasn't going to waste all my stash. I finished all my stash. And other than social alcohol that we kept in, I never kept another alcoholic stash from that point. And I don't even know who I'd been hiding it from at that point, to be honest, because there was only me and my daughter that was living there at the time. And everything was out of reach from her anyway. But yeah, it was just absolute. It's alcoholic thinking. It is the alcoholic thinking. But yeah, and then not long after that, we started trying unsuccessfully for a baby. I couldn't carry again because when I had my daughter, I got sterilised, so I can't carry again. But my partner was going to carry, so I was like, well, I'll only drink when you drink, which was true. I did only drink when they drank, but I instigated every drink we had that year. I massively cut down, like I was only drinking every few months, but I was still drinking, and I was still drinking more than I said I was drinking. I wasn't getting to the States, but I just couldn't stay stopped. I couldn't. And then on Christmas Day 2017, I turned round to Lizzie, my partner, and I said, I'm going to stop drinking for a whole year to prove I'm not an alcoholic. The dreaded words. And just over 3 months later, I was going through a turbulent time. And I had a friend that was in the fellowship, and he said, I broke down on him and I said, when's the next meeting? Are you going to be there? I can't do this on my own anymore. And he was at the next meeting. After he told me where it was, he was at the next meeting. He was there even earlier than he normally gets there, just in case I turned up even earlier. And there was a lovely woman who gave me my first phone number, who's sadly no longer with us. But she will forever be a massive, massive part of my heart, a massive part of my journey. And I was blessed isn't the right word, but I was able to be there at her funeral. It was really sad and it was really heartbreaking. But she had a lot of problems through COVID and after COVID. But honestly, she was one of the biggest parts of my recovery. And she was one of my biggest supporters. And one of the first people to truly accept me for being me. Because when I came in the rooms, there was no one like me. I didn't see anyone like me. I didn't hear anyone's story that was close to
Which is
mine.
massive, isn't it? It's massive because we talk about the identification. You don't look for the similarities, not the differences, isn't it? Massive.
Yeah, and I did look for similarities, and I heard loads of similarities, but I heard so many differences. I heard so many yets, and I was just, I could never, like, as much as I was embraced by the fellowship, I never felt part of. Until I heard a YouTube share by a trans guy that's in the same fellowship. And from that point on, I never hid my gender. I never hid my sexuality. But I was never like, this is who I am. Until I heard that share.
Acceptance.
Yeah.
It's acceptance is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
There, isn't it?
And what I did from that point on is I made sure that everyone knew who and what I was in my shares, in case there's one person sat in that room who's struggling to hear identification. Whether it's the identification of the gender identity, whether it's the identification of the sexuality, whether it's the identification of the doing the alcohol in reverse. I did my alcoholism in reverse. Most alcoholics do their worst drinking towards the end. And I did mine from 16 to 26. That was my biggest drinking. Oh, and I forgot to mention, one of the other reasons that I ended up going to the fellowship that I went to is because when I was 19 years old and I was really in my depth, absolutely in the depth of my alcoholism, my mum threatened me. She said, you're going to a 12-step fellowship for 6 months. No, you stop drinking for 6 months or you're going to a 12-step fellowship. And I knew what that 12-step fellowship meant. I knew that meant complete abstinence. And 19 years old, I was not ready for complete abstinence. At 32 years old, I still wasn't completely ready. I was still only aiming to get to that year. But when I got to 9 months, where I live, there's 2 ways down to the meeting that I was going to. One has 2 shops that both serve alcohol. one has one shop that does not serve alcohol, and I went that way. And that absolutely was the beginning of my recovery from that point on. From that 9-month point, my higher power, and I have a higher power today. I lost my religious God a long time ago, but my higher power has kept me sober for so many years. My higher power has got me married. My higher power has got me a relationship with my family that I never thought I would have. I have met my half sister for the first time in like 19, nearly 20 years because of my higher power, my working 12-step program, and my staying sober continuously day to day. Because without my sponsors that I've had in the past, I wouldn't have the life I have today. I have a thriving family. I have a lovely friendship group, and I don't just have queer friends. I have straight friends. I have alcoholic friends. I have friends coming out of my ears. And this coming from a person who could only make a friendship after they'd had a drink. Yeah.